Martin Luther and Copernicus were contemporaries, okay? So, Martin Luther shipwrecked the church, right? Okay? And he started the movement of Reformation. And the reason I call this, I bring your attention to the Reformation was in fact that Martin Luther and Copernicus were contemporaries, okay? So, and here's Martin Luther at the same time throwing out the Catholic way of doing things, which is you can buy your way out of sins. Okay? The Catholic priests, of course, were getting a lot of money from the people as a result of one of the practices that they established, and this was the practice of selling indulgences. Okay, now the practice of selling indulgences. Today, when you go to church, they just pass the basket around and you put whatever money you want in the basket, right? But in those days, you really had to pay money in order to get a certain excuse, okay, for what sin you may have committed, so that you don't spend too much time in that hell side, or in purgatory. And this is a picture of a particular indulgence that you could buy. Okay, so you give some money to the church and they would sell you this indulgence, which means if you stole money, you could pay 1 coin. If you committed adultery, you pay a little higher price. You committed murder, you can get salvation for 10 coins. But the ultimate salvation is to get out of purgatory and go to heaven. Okay, that Martin Luther, he started this Protestant movement, when he denounced this kind of abuse by the church. All right, and his main idea was that each person is directly answerable to God for salvation. Okay, you don't have to go to the Pope all the time. And he wrote these ideas down in these famous, what is called these famous 95 Theses, right? And this picture shows that he then nailed these theses to the wall of the church, okay? And he got into a lot of trouble because of that. And it was not only Luther, but there were other revolutionaries. One was Calvin, and he operated in France, and he preached an even more radical doctrine than did Luther. Luther basically said, we don't have to go through the Pope to get salvation. Calvin says, all men are equal in the eyes of God. That's a big statement, which is now, of course, the foundation of our culture, of the American culture. But this is a radical idea at that time. There's always a hierarchy. He's basically throwing away the entire hierarchy. So essentially then, from Germany and from France, you had these movements that spread out and, of course, tore Europe apart, okay, because of all the fighting. Because the church is not going to sit back and let this happen to lose authority. And so there was, of course, a war. In fact, Europe was destroyed by 30 years of war in this Reformation movement, okay. And so almost half the population of Europe was destroyed. They killed each other, okay. As I said, the church was not going to sit by and let this happen. And so the church started a Counter Reformation movement. And they, in fact, gave power to people like this guy, who is called the Inquisitioner, okay, the Spanish Inquisition or the Italian Inquisition. They essentially got hold of people and brought them to trial and said, you are speaking against God and you're speaking against us, and you're a devil, okay. And this was their Counter-Reformation, and we can prove that you're a devil because we're going to torture you until you say, yes, yes, I'm the devil, and then we're going to execute you, all right? Sound familiar? No, okay. Anyone spreading heresy against the church had to answer to the Inquisition, okay? And then, of course, they were condemned and tortured and burnt at the stake. And so here's a nice painting of the trial of the heretics, okay? And they show these two guys naked and forced to confess their sins of defying the church. And there's the judgment passed, and of course, they burned at the stake. So here you have this time, okay, where you have this whole mindset, okay, of where humanity is poised between heaven and hell, okay, and that we have to follow the hierarchy that's been established. And then you have Martin Luther and Calvin all trying to break apart from this thing. Okay, it wasn't that easy, okay, there was tremendous resistance. And it was at this time that came Copernicus, okay. So you cannot blame him then for coming up with his ideas, which I will now discuss, but then being scared to publish them. Okay? Copernicus never published his ideas. Okay? He was actually persuaded to publish a little bit by his friend Reticus, okay, which is all described in the book. Copernicus just figured something out very nicely, and he wrote about it, and he put it in the safe, and he locked it up, right, because he didn't want to be persecuted in this climate. All right, so now let's get back to Copernicus' revolution. And the whole idea of revolution, by the way, comes from Copernicus' theory. Okay? His changing of the Earth being in revolution around the sun, that word came from his theory and has now become part of our culture. Whenever something goes topsy-turvy, we say, we have a revolution. Well, we're talking about Copernicus' rearrangement of the heavens. So he rearranged the heavens to explain several things. Okay, one was, of course, the daily motion of the stars, the sun, and the moon. Okay? And in order to do that, he basically got very similar to Aristarchus. He got rid of the celestial sphere, and he made the Earth rotate. Okay? And then he could explain the annual motion of the Earth around the sun. With that, he could explain seasons and why the sun appears to move to the zodiac. And I'm going to discuss these aspects of his revolution little by little. Okay? I'm just giving you a preview of what I'm going to talk about now. He also was able to explain the precession of the equinox, which Hipparchus had discovered. And with his idea that the sun was the center of the planetary system, he could explain many, many observations that were all disjoint about planets. For example, that Venus and Mercury, you only see them in conjunction. And Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, you can appear in conjunction or in opposition. Or the retrograde motion of the planets. So he could explain all of this with his rearrangement. So we're going to go through this one by one, a little bit following his train of thought. Okay? So first let's look at his first step. And the first step was to simplify the motion of the sun. So if you look at what the Greeks had done, particularly say Eudoxus, he said the Earth is at the center of the universe and the sun has two paths. One is the daily path which goes round and round, and then the other one is the annual path. And so this daily path spirals. Okay, so you have 365 circles. Okay, and then they go back up again. And this is the apparent path of the sun through the year. And what Copernicus did as his first step was he said, this is very complicated. See, Copernicus was driven very, very strongly by aesthetics. Okay, he wanted to make things simpler. Okay, because Ptolemaic system was very complicated, 80 circles. And it was very difficult to make computations with that. And so Copernicus' idea was, can I come up with a simpler system? So in this part, it was easy for him to say that this daily motion of the sun does not exist. What's happening is that the Earth rotates. Okay? And he did not actually get rid of the sun's annual motion. He kept the sun moving, going around this way first in this tilted path. And later on, he came with the idea of getting rid of that motion also. So first he got rid of the motion of the sun on his daily path. And when he did that, you see, he could also get rid of the celestial sphere, because if the Earth spins, so do the stars. Okay, so he can get rid of that idea. So there's no need of the sun's daily path, okay, and no need of the celestial sphere. So that was his first part of his revolution. Now, the second part of his revolution is really very interesting. Or the second part of how his revolution came about is very interesting. And here, literally, Copernicus was inspired by Venus. Venus being the goddess of love. He was staring at the position of Venus relative to the sun. And what Copernicus noticed, which we have already pointed out many times, is that Venus is either found setting with the sun or rising before the sun. So this is called the evening star, and this is called the morning star. And you don't see the evening star and the morning star at the same day, okay? You see, on some part of the year, you'll see Venus as an evening star, and you'll always see Venus only as an evening star. You will never see it in the morning. And then another part of the year, you'll see Venus only as a morning star ahead of the rising sun. So Copernicus looked at this motion of Venus, and similarly the motion of Mercury, and he said, you know, it's amazing that Venus and Mercury are so close, and they always follow the sun. That Venus and Mercury are so close and they always follow the sun. Why are they so close to the sun? So because they're attached to the sun. Okay? So basically he got the idea that these two planets are somehow attached to the sun, not to the Earth. Okay? And then from there he jumped to the idea that maybe all planets are attached to the sun. Okay? So that's where he gets the idea that the Earth also revolves around the sun. Okay? So it's not so easy to just jump to this heliocentric system right away. So he went to this step by step. Now when he got that system, he brought a great deal of unity which ancient astronomers had recorded, and I already mentioned these facts, and I'm going to just mention them again very quickly, but slightly differently. And that is that Venus is sometimes a morning star, sometimes an evening star, and sometimes totally invisible. And another fact is that, as I just said, Venus and Mercury only appear in conjunction with the Sun, never in opposition, whereas Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn can appear both in conjunction and in opposition. And that is to show you now Mars in conjunction here. Okay, so again, I've turned off daylight, and you can notice the position of the planets relative to the setting sun, okay, because this is 7 p.m., so this is sun is setting, and you'll notice that these planets, Mars, Saturn, Venus, Mercury, all of these planets are on the same side of the sky as the sun, okay? By that I mean the sun is on the west, and Saturn, Venus, Mercury, and Mars are also on the west, okay? Now, the observation that people made after many, many years of studying the skies is that Venus and Mercury will always, always, always stay on the same side as the sun. Namely, if the sun is setting, Venus and Mercury are setting. You'll never find the sun setting and Venus and Mercury on the other side. You'll never find that. Okay? That's a key observation. So in other words, they say that Venus and Mercury are always in conjunction with the sun. They're on the same side of the sun. However, Mars and Saturn and Jupiter, they can actually be on the opposite side of the sun. Okay, so here's Mars, all right? Now you see Mars has appeared. Here's Mars. And if you look over here at the horizon, this is east, okay? And the time is 5:40 p.m., which means the sun has set on this side, on the west side. So the sun is back over here on the west side. So go to the west, and there's the sun. You see? There's the sun. So this planet here, which is once again good old Mercury, okay, and I can probably find Venus somewhere. Mercury is in conjunction with the sun, but Mars can be on the opposite side of the sky, right there, opposite side of the sky as the sun, which means Mars can appear in opposition. Similarly, Jupiter can appear in opposition, and Saturn can appear in opposition, or in conjunction, depending on the where it is in its motion. So this behavior of why some planets are appearing in conjunction and some planets are appearing in opposition, again, was the clue for Copernicus for his heliocentric system. Okay, so let's talk about the business about Venus appearing only in conjunction and never in opposition. So as I said, once he got the idea that Venus goes around the sun and the Earth also goes around the sun, then he said, okay, so now if Venus is near the Earth relative to the sun, then when you are on Earth and you're looking out and you see the sun in one direction, and then you look and you see Venus always in the same direction if Venus is on this side of the sun, nearer to you than the Earth. So you say, look, Venus is in conjunction. But now suppose Venus is on the other side of the sun, okay? Well, even then, Venus will appear in conjunction because it will look like Venus is on the same side of the sun. And what's really happening is that the path of Venus is inside the path of Earth. If you had Mars, okay, then Mars would be, if Mars would be here, far away, then it would appear in conjunction. But if Mars was here, then Mars would be in opposition. So what's happening is that Mars has an outer planet, and Jupiter is an outer planet, and Saturn is an outer planet, and Venus and Mercury are inner planets. And so that's what he got for the construction. So there is Mars. Okay, there's the orbit of Mars, and there's the orbit of Earth. And now, if Mars is on the other side, here's the sun, and here's Mars, and now Mars appears in conjunction. But if Mars is near Earth, then it's in opposition because you see Mars on the opposite side, the sun on this side. And so that's your opposition. So that then gave him the construction. Now he could also explain, with that construction, why Venus sometimes appears as a morning star and sometimes appears as an evening star. And that is all a question of how, where the star is relative to the sun. Okay? So you are on Earth, okay, and you're spinning this way, okay? Which means that when you arrive here, it's nighttime, and when you're here, it's daytime, because you're looking at the sun, okay? Now, Venus is going around the sun. If Venus is to the sorry, if Venus is to the west of the sun, then as your Earth point goes below the horizon and the sun starts to set, right, you'll stop getting any ray of light from the sun, but you'll still get ray of light from Venus, because Venus is to the west of the sun. Okay, see, so ray of light will still arrive here, but no ray of light will arrive here, so you're still in darkness, but you can still see the evening star. Okay. However, when Venus comes on this side, which is on the eastern side, then you can give the same argument in the other direction and say that it's in the morning that you're first going to see Venus, and then the sun will come out. Okay. So this is the morning star, this is the evening star, and in between you'll never see Venus at all, because this light of the sun essentially blinds you all the time, because the light of the sun comes straight to you, and whenever you go into dark you can't see Venus anymore, because any light from Venus is getting also light from the sun. Now the third step, once he had the Earth going around as a planet, then he could have the Earth orbiting the sun, and he could explain very easily why we have summer and we have winter. It's not that the path of the sun is tilted, but that the axis of rotation of Earth is tilted relative to the plane of the orbit of the sun. Okay? So look at this picture and tell me, when will you have summer and when will you have winter? So for this diagram, you have 4 positions of this Earth around the sun. When will you have summer? What am I saying? Identify the time of the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. Common sense question. Hopefully everybody got it right. Yes, B, correct. Thank you. And the reason is simple, right? Because when you're in the northern hemisphere, you're tilted closer to the sun, so you're going to get hot. When you're here, you're going to get cold because you're further away from the sun. That little difference is summer and winter. Okay. And here you see it's the same. You're going to get the same. North and south are going to get the same amount of sun. These are your equinox positions. Now, how do we know that the moon orbits the Earth and not the sun? And that's because you have eclipses, right? Because at some points the moon comes between the sun and the Earth, so it can't be just. And then at other points it's opposite. Okay, so because of both types of eclipses, solar eclipse and lunar eclipse, you can have you can justify that the moon goes around the Earth. And finally, the retrograde motion. Okay, how do you explain retrograde motion? As I said, the ancients, they were in love with the planets, as you can tell from all the stories that they created about the planets. They studied these irregular planetary motions religiously, literally religiously. Okay, and they found that there were regular cycles where heavens show symmetry, but then they found these irregular behavior. Okay? And the irregular behavior I've shown you the first example of. Okay? The first example of the irregular behavior was what we call retrograde motion. Okay? This is the strange motion of Mars. Now, it took a long time for them to figure it out, and I showed it to you in a very advanced fashion because I have the Starry Night program. But now I give you a feeling of how they discovered the retrograde motion of one planet, let's say Mars. Okay? And so let me show you that first by then you can appreciate how difficult it was for them to find that. So here is the sky, and here's Mars, and here are the constellations, and we're going to progress the time by night after night, a regular night, okay? And you are an astronomer of the Egyptian or Babylonian era, and you're keeping track of the motion of Mars through the zodiac constellations, okay? So what you need to do is watch as I change the days slowly as to what Mars is doing relative to the bull. Okay, the bull is just coming into the picture, and so here's the bull, and here's the leg of the bull. Okay, so watch what Mars does relative to the leg of the bull. Now I'm making you an Egyptian astronomer. Okay, so so you follow it. He's approaching the leg. He hugs the leg, right? He goes around the leg, and then he turns around, and he goes the other way. Okay, so by observing the position of Mars relative to the leg of Taurus, okay, see, relative to the leg of Taurus, that was the first observation of the retrograde motion of Mars. Okay, so in the beginning, he comes towards the leg and then he goes away from the leg. Okay, so that was, in fact, when the Babylonian astronomer discovered this property of Mars, he was so surprised, you know, in fact, they made all kinds of predictions about the future of kings and queens based on what the planets were doing. And when he discovered this, you know, oh, Mars has gone backwards, I'm afraid my my past prediction about your fate is wrong. Cut off his head, right? Because he was a bad astrologer. Right? He predicted stuff, and then he withdrew it because Mars turned around and went the other way. So that, okay. So here's Mars, all right? So you watch the word Mars and see what it does relative to these constellations, okay? As I choose the advance of Mars as a sidereal day. You see, there's your loop. Okay, so here's Mars, all right? So you watch the word Mars and see what it does relative to these constellations, okay? As I choose the advance of Mars as a sidereal day. You see, there's your loop-the-loop behavior. So the retrograde motion of Mars was one of the strange discoveries. Okay, so this path that I showed you was like this. Okay. And you can see that at one particular day it's in Cancer, then it moves to Leo, then it goes back, and then it's off. Okay, how do you explain retrograde motion? So there it says, consider the speed of the planets. Okay, so it's like you are going on a boat. And if you're going on a boat, you see this other boat coming towards you, right? Suppose the second boat is going slower than you, and you're going faster. So you'll see this boat coming towards you. But then after you pass the boat, it's going away from you. So this business about the planet Mars appearing to somehow come towards you and then go away from you relative to the constellations is really a question of the relative speeds of the different planets. And that he could really explain very easily in his heliocentric system, which I've shown you before. So here is the heliocentric system. The Sun is at the center, here's Mercury, Venus, and here's Earth, and here's Mars, okay? So I'm now going to play this and advance it by days, okay? And so get the solar system now moving, and you can see that the planets that are near the Sun, like Mercury and Venus, they move faster than the planets that are further away from the Sun, like the Earth. But Earth moves faster than Mars, so you will see that at some point, if you have Mars here and Earth here, Earth will actually catch up with Mars and then will overtake Mars. So where in this picture will you get retrograde motion? Okay, you'll get retrograde motion when you get a coincidence like between the Earth and the planet. Okay, so here there will be retrograde motion, and once again we are approaching retrograde motion for Mars. Said basically the idea was an aesthetic desire for simplicity, to get rid of the Ptolemaic complexity. And as we said several times, Ptolemy used 80 circles for 7 heavenly bodies to get accurate descriptions. And he made the planets move on epicycles, and the epicycle moved on eccentric circles, and often the center of the circle was not the center of the Earth, and that's why we call the circle eccentric. Okay? And each planet needs a separate construction. Now and all these circles didn't always turn in the same direction. And so basically Ptolemy had created a monster. And Ptolemy, in fact, complicated the skies even more. He came up with 80 circles. Okay? But instead of showing you his system, I'm going to show you what the sky looked like that he tried to describe. Okay? So he tried to describe the motion of the planets with these complicated circles. And I'm going to show you what it looked like for him in his picture, in his description. Okay? So now we're looking at the sky, and we're mapping the path of all the different planets, including the Sun. So the Earth is at the center, okay? So here we go. We're going to we can move the time by days, and this is what Ptolemy saw. Okay? As the planets go around and the Sun goes around the Earth is there. Venus goes loop-the-loop. The Sun is the only one that does not make loop-the-loop, but here's Mercury making loop-the-loop. There's Venus. And now I'm going to zoom out so you can see some of the other planets. I can't zoom out that much, huh? All right. But eventually you'll see Mars, and you'll see Mars also will make a loop-the-loop. Okay, there's Mars. There he goes. There he goes. See? And so what Ptolemy did was he got this picture and he developed all the circles necessary to describe this picture, namely 80 circles upon circles. to get that picture. Okay? And that was the masterpiece of astronomy. Okay? And it lasted for 2,000 years until Copernicus. Okay? And this masterpiece of astronomy, the Arabs got, if you remember, that the Alexandrian culture was destroyed, and the Arabs adopted it, and they called it Al-Majesti, which means the majestic work of astronomy. And everything was with reference to Ptolemy. Okay, so Ptolemy was the king of astronomy. He had developed this system of planets moving around, and he could explain the positions of the planets accurately with time. And what Copernicus did was he got rid of that monster, and he said, put the sun in the middle, okay? And he says, who indeed in this most beautiful temple would place the light giver in any other part whence it can illumine all other parts? Indeed, the sun, reposing as it were on a royal throne, controls the family of planets which surrounds him. I mean, he's really thinking far ahead. When he says the sun controls the planets, you could almost say, hey, he's almost thinking like Newton. The sun attracts all the planets, and therefore you have these orbits. But so Copernicus was thinking very far ahead. So he had this nice picture. The only difference, the only thing that was left was the moon. Okay, only the moon goes around the Earth. Okay, so you have the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and the moon goes around the Earth. The sun-centric system is the following. Okay, now watch this. This is really nice because this is Copernicus' system, right? So here's the sun now at the center, and here are all the planets. And I'm going to zoom in so that you can see the inner planets better. Inner planets being the ones that we know and love, right? Including Earth. All right, so here's Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Earth, and these are the various orbits. But now we can animate everything, because I do want to make a point here. Let me go one day at a time. Okay, so here we go. All right, so I want to make a point here that there's two parts. One is that the planets are a certain distance away from the sun, and the further the planets are from the sun, the slower they seem to be moving. In other words, the longer they take to go around. You could say, yeah, of course they're much further, they have to travel a bigger distance, but it turns out that their speeds are also slower, okay, compared to Earth, Mercury, and Venus. So now let me go out, and so you can see the other planets again. So I come back over here, now you can see Jupiter, and you can see Saturn, and now you know why we call Saturn the old man, right? And you can see the inner planets going around. And we're going to talk about all of these speeds of motion much more detailed when we get to Kepler and so on.